You know what's funny about being the only human on a ship full of aliens who think they're the smartest species in the galaxy? Everything. Absolutely everything. My name's Riley Martinez, but everyone calls me Doc, and I'm a combat medic stuck aboard the research vessel Cosmic Blunder. Yeah, that's really what they named it. In galactic standard, it translates to something like glorious scientific endeavor, but the human translator got a bit creative. I didn't have the heart to tell them. Our fearless leader is Captain Vex'tar, a 7-foot-tall reptilian who looks like a crocodile had a baby with a philosophy professor. Everything he says sounds like he's delivering the Gettysburg Address, even when he's asking someone to pass the salt. Behold, the sodium chloride approaches in all its crystalline majesty. That's an actual quote, by the way. Then there's Chief Scientist Quin'dal, an insectoid with more degrees than a thermometer and twice as much attitude. Her compound eyes literally sparkle when she's about to correct someone, which happens roughly every 30 seconds. She's got this habit of clicking her mandibles when she thinks, which sounds like someone typing very angrily on the world's tiniest keyboard. And finally, we have Security Officer Zon'rik, a paranoid crustacean who treats every shadow like it might contain assassins. His exoskeleton changes colors based on his mood, and let me tell you, it's been various shades of terrified orange for the past 6 months. The guy makes crossing the hallway look like a military operation. These three geniuses have spent the better part of a year hunting for something called the Void Reaper. According to galactic legend, it's the most terrifying predator in known space. Apparently, it's wiped out entire colonies, destroyed military fleets, and once ate a space station. You know, typical monster resume stuff. The Void Reaper, Quin'dal announced during our morning briefing, her mandibles clicking with excitement, represents the apex of evolutionary predatory perfection. Its neural pathways suggest intelligence rivaling our own, combined with physical capabilities that defy conventional xenobiology. I sipped my coffee and nodded along. Uh-huh. And you want to catch this thing because? Captain Vex'tar puffed up his chest, which made him look like a scaly balloon animal. Think of the scientific advancement, dear Martinez. The knowledge we could gain. The prestige? Right, prestige. Because that's exactly what you want when dealing with something that allegedly eats space stations for breakfast. Zon'rik's exoskeleton shifted to worried purple. The legends speak of creatures that move like shadows and strike like lightning. What if it's already found us? What if it's been following us this entire time, waiting for the perfect moment to? Zon'rik, I interrupted. You said the same thing about that space debris we passed yesterday. And the week before that about a particularly suspicious-looking asteroid. Asteroids can be deceptive, he muttered, shell flickering to embarrassed pink. The thing is, I've been a combat medic for 12 years. I've patched up soldiers after firefights with everything from rebel militias to Rouge AI mechs. I've performed emergency surgery in zero gravity while under enemy fire. These aliens think I'm just some primitive human who got lucky enough to end up in space. They have no idea that humans have been dealing with apex predators for millennia. We used to hunt mammoths with pointy sticks. We domesticated wolves. We turned the planet's most efficient killers into pets that wear little sweaters and do tricks for treats. But sure, let's go catch the scary space monster. What could possibly go wrong? Sensors are detecting the creature's biosignature in the Kepler Nebula, Quin'dal announced, her voice practically vibrating with scientific fervor. According to my calculations, we should be able to intercept it within 48 hours. I finished my coffee and stood up. Well, this should be interesting. I better go prep the medical bay. Something tells me we're going to need it. As I walked out, I heard Vex'tar proclaiming something about claiming our rightful place in the annals of scientific history. Yeah, sure we were. 47 hours later, we found it. Magnificent, breathed Captain Vex'tar as our sensors lit up like a Christmas tree. Absolutely magnificent. I looked at the readouts and had to admit, the thing was big, really big. The biosignature suggested something roughly the size of a blue whale, but with significantly more tentacles and what appeared to be natural armor plating. Energy readings are off the charts, Quin'dal reported, her mandibles clicking so fast she sounded like a machine gun. Neural activity suggests advanced cognitive function. This creature is definitely sapient. Sapient and homicidal. Zon'rik added helpfully, his shell cycling through the entire rainbow of anxiety. The legends clearly state that no one who encounters a Void Reaper lives to tell about it. Then how do we have legends about it? I asked. The bridge went quiet for a moment. Well, Vex'tar cleared his throat. Obviously some accounts must have survived through other means. Right. Other means. Like maybe the thing isn't quite as murdery as everyone thinks. Their capture plan was, to put it mildly, insane. It involved 17 different types of containment fields, 42 backup systems, and something called a neural dampening matrix that sounded like it came from a bad science fiction movie. We'll approach from Vector 77 Alpha, Vex'tar announced, apparently having appointed himself Space Admiral. Quin'dal will activate the containment grid while Zon'rik mans the defensive systems. What about Doc? Zon'rik asked, gesturing at me with one of his many arms. Oh, the human can observe, Vex'tar said dismissively. Perhaps he'll learn something about proper xenobiological procedures. I bit back about 17 different sarcastic responses and just nodded. Sure thing, Captain. I'll just stand here and watch the professionals work. The first sign that things weren't going according to plan was when the creature noticed us approaching. Instead of the expected aggressive response, it just floated there. Like it was curious. Fascinating, Quin'dal muttered. It's not exhibiting standard predatory behavior patterns. Maybe it's planning something, Zon'rik suggested, his shell now a lovely shade of impending doom maroon. They activated their elaborate containment grid, and immediately half the system started throwing error messages. Red lights flashed, alarms blared, and I watched 3 supposedly genius aliens run around like their heads were on fire. The quantum resonance is fluctuating. Containment matrix is destabilizing. We're all going to die. That last one was Zon'rik. Shocker. Meanwhile, the Void Reaper just hung there in space, occasionally twitching one of its massive tentacles. It almost looked bored. Maybe try reversing the polarity, I suggested. Don't be ridiculous, Quin'dal snapped. That's a primitive human concept that has no basis in. I reached over and flipped the polarity switch. The containment grid stabilized immediately. Ha, Quin'dal said. Well, that was unexpected. Lucky guess, Vex'tar muttered. But I caught him making notes on his tablet. With their fancy equipment finally working, they managed to capture the creature. It didn't even resist, which should have been our first clue that something was off. Instead, they congratulated themselves on their superior alien intellect, while I watched a clearly injured and exhausted creature get dragged into our cargo bay. Behold, Vex'tar proclaimed as we watched the Void Reaper through the observation windows. The galaxy's most feared predator, contained at last. The creature was definitely impressive. 30 feet long, covered in what looked like natural armor plating, with dozens of tentacles that moved like liquid shadow. Its eyes were the size of dinner plates and glowed with an eerie blue light. It also looked like it hadn't eaten in weeks. Now comes the delicate process of study and analysis, Quin'dal announced. We'll need to maintain strict containment protocols while gathering behavioral data. What about medical assessment? I asked. Shouldn't we make sure it's healthy before? Healthy? Zon'rik's shell flashed to incredulous orange. Doc, this thing could probably bite through our hull. Medical assessment seems a bit premature. I looked at the creature again. It had curled up in the corner of the containment bay, tentacles wrapped around itself like it was trying to stay warm. Real threatening behavior there. Right, I said. Premature. Got it. As the aliens busied themselves with their sophisticated analysis, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something obvious. Something important. Something that was going to bite us in the ass very, very soon. You'd think that 3 supposedly advanced alien species would know how to operate a simple containment field without nearly killing everyone on board. You'd be wrong. It started during what Quin'dal called a routine specimen transfer. They wanted to move the Void Reaper from the cargo bay to a more secure containment cell for detailed analysis. The procedure involved temporarily disrupting the containment field while activating a series of backup systems. Completely routine, Vex'tar assured me as I watched them prep their equipment. We've performed thousands of similar transfers.
On creatures this dangerous? I asked.
Well, no. but the principles are the same. Famous last words right there. I should have seen it coming when Zon'rik started hyperventilating during the equipment check. His shell was cycling through colors so fast he looked like a disco ball having a seizure. What if the backup systems fail? He wheezed. What if the creature breaks containment during transfer? What if it's been pretending to be docile this whole time? Zon'rik, Quin'dal said with exaggerated patience, your paranoia, while occasionally useful, is completely unfounded in this situation. Our calculations show a 99.7% success probability. I've learned that when someone gives you odds that specific, you should probably start writing your will. The first thing that went wrong was the primary containment field flickering during startup. Not a big deal, according to Quin'dal. A minor power fluctuation. Completely normal. The second thing was the backup containment system activating 30 seconds late. Slight timing discrepancy. Within acceptable parameters. The third thing was me getting locked inside the containment bay when the emergency blast doors activated during what Vex'tar called a minor system malfunction. Don't panic, Martinez. His voice crackled through the intercom as I found myself sealed in a room with what was supposedly the galaxy's most dangerous predator. We'll have you out of there in just a few minutes. The Void Reaper, who had been resting quietly in the corner, slowly turned one massive eye toward me. We stared at each other for a long moment. Well, I said to the creature, this is awkward. Through the intercom, I could hear the three aliens arguing over who was responsible for the door malfunction. Lots of clicking, hissing, and what sounded like someone molting under stress. The human is trapped with the specimen. Zon'rik wailed. We're about to witness the end of primitive human evolution. Martinez, can you hear us? Vex'tar called. Try to remain calm and avoid making any sudden movements. I looked at the Void Reaper again. It had uncurled slightly and was watching me with what looked like curiosity. Hard to tell with those alien features. But it didn't seem particularly interested in eating me. How long until you can override the doors? I asked. Working on it. Quin'dal's voice was tight with stress. The system lockdown is more comprehensive than anticipated. Perhaps 20 minutes? 30 at most? Great. Half an hour alone with the galaxy's most feared predator. The creature made a sound then, low and rumbling, like a cat purring through a subwoofer. It was actually kind of soothing. You know what, guys? I said into the intercom. Take your time. I think we're going to be fine in here. Fine? Zon'rik's voice cracked. Martinez, that creature could tear you apart with a single tentacle. I watched as one of those supposedly deadly tentacles slowly reached toward me. I held perfectly still as it gently touched my shoulder, then my face, like it was trying to figure out what I was. Yeah, I said, gently patting the tentacle. Real terrifying. The creature made that purring sound again, louder this time. Up close, I could see details the observation cameras had missed. Scars along its armor plating. Wounds that looked infected. One of its eyes was clouded with what looked like cataracts. This wasn't the galaxy's most dangerous predator.
This was a sick, scared animal that needed help?
Martinez. Vex'tar's voice was getting more frantic. The creature is making aggressive vocalizations. Try to back away slowly. I looked at the Void Reaper, who was now gently wrapping a tentacle around my arm like a friendly handshake. Yeah, Captain, I said, really aggressive. I'm absolutely terrified. While the aliens panicked outside, I did what I do best. I started a medical assessment. Easy there, big guy, I murmured as I carefully examined the creature. Let's see what's wrong with you. The Void Reaper, despite being supposedly the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, was incredibly patient as I checked him over. He even held still when I used my medical scanner, though he seemed fascinated by the beeping sounds it made. What I found broke my heart. The creature was starving. Not just hungry, but actively malnourished to the point where his body was starting to consume his own muscle mass. Several of his tentacles showed signs of recent injury, poorly healed and probably infected. His left eye was completely clouded over, likely from an untreated infection that had gone septic. But the worst part was the scarring. This creature had been hurt badly and repeatedly by what looked like energy weapons. Someone had been hunting him. Jesus, I whispered. running my hand along a particularly nasty scar. "What did they do to you?" The creature made a soft keening sound and leaned into my touch. Despite being 30 feet long and covered in natural armor, he reminded me of every wounded animal I'd ever treated. Scared, hurt, and desperate for someone to help. "Martinez." Quin'dal's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your bio readings are spiking. Are you injured?" "I'm fine," I called back, pulling emergency medical supplies from my kit. "But our dangerous predator isn't doing so hot." I cleaned and dressed the infected wounds first, using broad-spectrum antibiotics that should work on most carbon-based life forms. The creature watched me work with obvious intelligence, sometimes moving his tentacles to give me better access to injuries. "That's it," I said softly. "Good boy. We're going to get you fixed up." Through the observation windows, I could see the aliens running around in full panic mode. Zon'rik appeared to be building some kind of barricade, while Vex'tar was dramatically gesturing at a tactical display. Quin'dal kept taking readings and shaking her head in apparent disbelief. "The creature's behavior patterns make no sense," she announced. "It should have attacked immediately upon breach of containment." I looked at my patient, who was now purring contentedly as I treated his wounds. "Maybe your behavioral models are wrong." "Impossible. Our xenobiological databases clearly indicate." "Your databases," I interrupted, applying regenerative gel to a particularly nasty cut, "are based on second-hand accounts and legends. When's the last time any of you actually examined a live specimen?" Silence from the intercom. That's what I thought. As I worked, the creature's story became clearer. The pattern of injuries suggested he'd been fleeing from something for a long time. The malnutrition indicated he'd been unable to hunt properly, probably because of his wounds. The infected eye suggested no access to medical care. This wasn't a predator terrorizing the galaxy. This was a refugee. "Almost done, buddy," I said, checking his vitals on my scanner. "Looking much better already." The creature rumbled something that sounded almost like a response. His good eye tracked my movements with obvious intelligence, and when I stumbled slightly, one of his tentacles caught me before I could fall. "Thanks," I said, patting the tentacle. "You're all right, you know that?" "Martinez." Vex'tar's voice had reached new levels of panic. "The specimen appears to be exhibiting protective behavior. This is unprecedented." I looked through the observation window at 3 aliens who were supposed to be the galaxy's premier xenobiologists, and none of them had figured out what any decent veterinarian would have seen immediately. "Hey guys," I said into the intercom. "I've got some good news and some bad news." "What's the good news?" Zon'rik asked in a tiny voice. "The good news is your galaxy's deadliest predator isn't going to hurt anyone. He's actually pretty sweet once you get to know him." "And the bad news?" Quin'dal asked. I looked at my new patient, who was now using one tentacle to gently play with my medical kit while another kept a protective curl around my shoulders. "The bad news is that your reputations as xenobiologists are about to take a serious hit." 20 minutes later, the aliens had apparently decided I was suffering from some kind of Stockholm syndrome and needed immediate rescue. Because nothing says scientific method like ignoring direct observational evidence in favor of preconceived notions. "Initiating emergency extraction protocol," Vex'tar announced through the intercom. "Martinez, move away from the specimen immediately." I looked at the Void Reaper, who I'd started calling Reaper for short. He was currently using 2 tentacles to help me organize my medical supplies while a third one gently massaged my shoulder where I'd pulled a muscle earlier. "Yeah, Captain, I don't think that's necessary." "Martinez, you are clearly suffering from psychological compromise due to extended exposure to an apex predator. Please step back so we can deploy the containment drones." Containment drones, of course. Because when you're dealing with a wounded, frightened animal, the obvious solution is to send in flying robots with stun weapons. "Guys, listen to me very carefully," I said, standing up and scratching Reaper behind what I assumed was his ear. "Your apex predator is actually a refugee who's been running from someone for months, maybe years. He's injured, starving, and scared. The last thing he needs is more violence. The creature has clearly manipulated your perceptions," Quin'dal declared. "Advanced predators often exhibit pseudo-social behaviors to lower their prey's defenses." I looked at Reaper, who tilted his massive head and made a questioning sound. "Did you hear that, buddy? Apparently you're manipulating me." Reaper's response was to gently boop me on the nose with the tip of a tentacle. Terrifying, I deadpanned. Absolutely horrifying. That's when the first containment drone flew through the partially opened blast door. Reaper's entire demeanor changed instantly. The gentle, curious creature I'd been treating suddenly coiled into a defensive posture, his armor plating shifting to a darker color as he positioned himself between me and the drone. "Oh, easy, boy," I said, putting a hand on his flank. "It's okay. Menradier." But it wasn't okay. The drone was already charging its stun array, and Reaper was clearly having flashbacks to whatever had hurt him so badly before. "Abort the drone," I shouted into the intercom. "You're scaring him." "Negative, Martinez. The specimen is exhibiting aggressive posturing. We need to neutralize the threat." The drone fired. Reaper screamed. It was a sound I'll never forget, equal parts pain and rage and terror. He lashed out with 3 tentacles simultaneously, turning the drone into scrap metal in about half a second. "Son of a bitch," I muttered, pulling out my emergency stimulants. "Reaper, hey, look at me. You're safe. It's okay." Numb. But 3 more drones were already flying through the door. "Martinez, get down." Zon'rik's voice was shrill with panic. "The creature has entered full combat mode." Reaper had indeed entered combat mode, and I have to admit, it was pretty impressive. Turns out when you're not half dead from starvation and infection, and when someone threatens something you're protecting, avoid Reaper is actually kind of terrifying. He moved like liquid shadow, tentacles whipping through the air faster than the eye could track. The drones didn't stand a chance. Within 30 seconds, the containment bay was full of smoking robot parts. "Okay," I said, checking my equipment. "New plan." I grabbed onto Reaper's harness with one hand and my medical kit with the other. "What are you doing?" Vex'tar demanded. "Something incredibly stupid," I replied, then looked up at Reaper. "What do you say, boy? Want to show these geniuses what cooperation looks like?" Reaper rumbled what sounded like agreement, then lifted me onto his back with surprising gentleness. "Martinez, have you completely lost your mind?" "Probably," I said, settling into position. "But I'm not letting you hurt him anymore." That's when we heard the sound of heavy combat drones approaching. "Oh, come on," I groaned. "How many robots do you people have?" Reaper's answer was to charge straight through the blast doors. What followed was probably the most ridiculous chase scene in galactic history. Me, riding a 30-foot-long space monster through the corridors of a research vessel, while a pack of combat drones tried to stun us both into unconsciousness. "This is not how I expected my day to go," I called to Reaper as he used his tentacles to swing us around a corner like some kind of cephalopod Spider-Man. The aliens were shouting contradictory orders through the ship's intercom system. "Decontain the specimen. Protect the human. Someone override the drone protocols." Why is Martinez laughing? I was laughing because this was insane. Completely, utterly, hilariously insane. I was riding an alien creature through a spaceship while being chased by robots, and somehow this felt more normal than sitting through another one of Quin'dal's lectures on proper scientific methodology. Reaper seemed to be enjoying himself too. His earlier panic had faded, replaced by what I could only describe as playful mischief. He was showing off now, using moves that were completely unnecessary but looked incredibly cool. We burst onto the main bridge just as Captain Vex'tar was ordering what sounded like a full security lockdown. "Surprise," I said, as Reaper gently set me down in front of the captain's chair. 3 aliens stared at us in complete shock. "Well," I said, patting Reaper's flank, "I think we need to talk." "Let me get this straight," Captain Vex'tar said slowly, his reptilian features twisted in confusion. "The galaxy's most feared predator is actually a refugee fleeing from illegal experimental facilities." "That's right," I said, checking the fresh bandages on Reaper's tentacles. We were back in the medical bay, which was now serving as a makeshift interspecies conference room. The scarring patterns are consistent with energy weapon torture, probably over an extended period. Someone was using him as a test subject. Quin'dal's mandibles were clicking in what I'd learned was her version of embarrassment. But the legends clearly state that Void Reapers are apex predators responsible for the destruction of multiple colonies. Right, I said. And who reported those colony destructions? The three aliens exchanged glances. Government sources, Zon'rik said quietly, his shell a subdued gray. Military reports. Official channels. The same government that probably runs those illegal experimental facilities, I pointed out. Funny how that works out. Reaper, who was currently using one tentacle to play with a stress ball I'd given him, made a soft sound that might have been agreement. His injured eye was already looking better thanks to the regenerative treatments, and he'd gained 5 pounds since I'd started feeding him proper nutrition supplements. This is unprecedented, Vex'tar said, deflating slightly. If you're correct, then our entire understanding of this species is fundamentally flawed. Not flawed, I corrected. Deliberately falsified. Someone wanted people to think these creatures were monsters so nobody would investigate when they started disappearing. It was a classic cover-up. Create a scary story about dangerous predators. Then when the creatures start going missing, everyone assumes they've just moved on to terrorize someone else. Meanwhile, some government black site is running illegal experiments on a sapient species. But how did you know? Quin'dal asked. Your medical training shouldn't have covered xenobiology to this extent. I shrugged. Basic pattern recognition. Injured animal behavior is pretty universal, regardless of species. Scared creatures act scared. Hurt creatures act hurt. Angry creatures act angry. Your apex predator was acting like a lost, wounded animal, so that's what I treated him as. That's remarkably simple, she said. The best solutions usually are. Reaper had finished with the stress ball and was now gently examining my stethoscope with obvious fascination. When I held it out to him, he carefully took it with a tentacle tip and held it up to his own chest, mimicking what he'd seen me do during his examination. Smart boy, I said, scratching behind his ear ridge. You figured that out fast. So what happens now? Zon'rik asked. His shell had finally settled on a calm blue color, though he still jumped every time Reaper moved. Now, I said, we do what we should have done from the beginning. We help him. It took 3 days to set up what we needed. Reaper needed continued medical treatment, proper nutrition, and time to recover from his ordeal. More importantly, he needed a safe place to stay while we figured out how to expose the people who'd been torturing his species. The Galactic Ethics Council will want a full report, Vex'tar said, reviewing the documentation we'd compiled. This could trigger a major investigation into government xenobiology programs. Good, I said. It's about time. Reaper had integrated into the crew better than anyone expected. He'd appointed himself as the ship's unofficial security officer, which mostly involved him following Zon'rik around and reassuring him that every shadow wasn't hiding assassins. Zon'rik was still nervous, but his shell stayed a much healthier color these days. He'd also become fascinated with the ship's systems, often watching over Quin'dal's shoulder as she worked. She'd started explaining her research to him, and I swear he understood most of it. His responses were getting more sophisticated every day. You know, Quin'dal said during our final briefing, I think we might need to revise our classification of Void Reaper intelligence. He appears to be not just sapient, but genuinely brilliant. No kidding, I said, watching Reaper use 6 tentacles simultaneously to help repair a malfunctioning scanner array. Give him a few more weeks and he'll probably be running this ship better than the rest of us. What about you, Martinez? Vex'tar asked. Will you be staying on as our medical officer? I looked at Reaper, who had paused in his work to listen to the conversation. His good eye was bright with intelligence, and what I'd learned to recognize as affection. Yeah, I said. I think I will. Someone needs to keep an eye on you guys. Make sure you don't accidentally declare war on any more refugees. Zon'rik's shell flushed pink with embarrassment. That was a reasonable mistake given the available information. Aha. Sure it was. As we settled into our new routine, I couldn't help but reflect on the irony of it all. 3 supposedly advanced alien species had completely missed what any decent veterinarian would have spotted immediately. They'd been so convinced of their own superiority that they'd ignored basic observational evidence in favor of preconceived notions. Meanwhile, the primitive human had figured it out in about 10 minutes. "Hey, Reaper," I said, as he curled up in his favorite corner of the medical bay. "What do you think? Ready for our next adventure?" He rumbled contentedly and gently wrapped a tentacle around my ankle. In the weeks since we'd found him, he'd grown stronger, healthier, and more confident. The scared, wounded creature we'd captured was becoming the intelligent, capable being he was always meant to be. "Good boy," I said, settling in next to him with my medical journals. "We make a pretty good team, don't we?" His purring response suggested he agreed. Outside the viewport, stars wheeled past as we headed toward our next destination. Somewhere out there were more of Reaper's people, probably being held in more illegal facilities. The Galactic Ethics Council was already launching investigations based on our report, but it would take time to shut down the entire operation. Until then, we had work to do. "Martinez," Vex'tar's voice came over the intercom. "We're approaching the Centauri system. Sensors are detecting what appears to be another distress signal." I looked at Reaper, who had lifted his head at the captain's words. His expression suggested he knew exactly what kind of distress signal we were dealing with. "What do you say, buddy?" I asked. "Ready to go save some more dangerous predators?" His enthusiastic rumble was all the answer I needed. Just another day aboard the Cosmic Blunder, where the humans were the smart ones and the galaxy's deadliest predators turned out to be oversized puppies in need of medical attention. I wouldn't have it any other way.